Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Megan Nicholas. I'm with the Colorado College Career Center. I'm really excited to have our guest with us today, Maggie Deadrick. Maggie, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to return to campus virtually in this sort of fun way and share some experiences with you guys.
Wonderful. Well, we're looking forward to getting some advice from you for our current students and our recent grads. If you could just start by sharing a little bit about your experience at Colorado College and then that transition to life after CC.
Yeah, so I graduated in 2014, which makes me 6 years post-grad, which is almost unfathomable to me. It feels like yesterday. Still some of the fondest memories of my life spent, in Colorado Springs and below Pikes Peak. I was a feminist and gender studies major at CC. I also minored in journalism. I was the life and style editor of the Catalyst newspaper. What else did I do while I was there? I mean, of course, had loads and loads of fun with friends, spending time in the mountains, as well as doing things around the area. So I graduated with very little direction in terms of where I wanted to head in my career. And I don't think of that as necessarily a bad thing. I had the chance to explore so many different options and classes and content while I was a student at CC, and really found myself with sort of the world at my fingertips upon graduation. I actually spent my senior year applying to the Peace Corps and did receive a Peace Corps placement right after I graduated, which ultimately was put on hold due to civil unrest in the country in which I was placed, and I ultimately declined that placement in the end. And I didn't spend a whole ton of time in that first year really looking to develop my lifelong career path. I spent time as a lifeguard in the summer after I graduated. I did a lot of traveling in the fall. And then I took my very first job out of school at a local CBS television affiliate station in my hometown of Cincinnati, which was a career path that I was pretty interested in exploring from the early days of my time at CC. I, as a journalism minor, worked at KRCC, the radio station on campus. So I had a taste for broadcast and thought this would be the path for me. I spent less than a year in that role before realizing that I was looking for a way to be able to apply a wider set of skills to the work that I was doing. And I ultimately, this is sort of the funny connection that ultimately led me on the career path that I'm at now, reached out to a CC connection, a friend who was in my graduating class, who I met through my feminist and gender studies practicum, who had recently gotten a job at Google. And at that time, I was simply looking to make a personal move to the Bay Area and wanted to understand how someone who had studied gender studies like myself was able to get a job at a tech company like Google. I had no idea that there were jobs outside of computer engineering and coding. So I ultimately leveraged this CC connection, this peer connection, to be recommended for, interview for, and ultimately accept my very first sort of corporate tech job at Google. I spent 4 awesome years there, and recently, in the last 6 months, made the move to Amazon here in Australia, where I am helping to launch the Amazon marketplace that all Americans are very familiar with here in the Australian market.
Wonderful. So you mentioned, Maggie, that you you majored in feminist and gender studies. I'm really interested if you could share a little bit more about what you learned from that major and how that's helped you in your career journey. And you've kind of,
Absolutely.
When you shifted, you also became very bright. So if you could.
I'm trying to figure out what to do about this because the sun is now coming up. Okay.
So Maggie,
do you want to ask that question?
Yeah. So you mentioned that you are a feminist and gender studies major. And I'd be really interested if you could share just a little bit more about how that major, what you learned from that major, and how that major has helped you in your career journey.
Absolutely. I think there's sort of a common maybe cliche trope that liberal arts, and particularly the humanities, teaches you nothing and prepares you for everything, which I know is a little bit glib, but also something that I really value. In the actual content of most of my gender studies classes aren't things that I use in my day-to-day life, but without a doubt, the skills that I learned in that major, and also most notably on the block plan, are things that not only come in handy and make me successful in my current and previous roles, but also things that helped me get a job. So specifically pertaining to feminist and gender studies, I feel like I am particularly aware and in tune of the intersectional dynamics that are happening all around me in the corporate workplace. It helps me to be a really great critical thinker. It helps me make informed and multifaceted decisions. And it also, in my opinion, makes me a sort of compassionate and in tune leader and teammate when it comes to working with groups of very diverse people coming from different backgrounds and different ideas. So I value that major and the studies in that department so much. And when it comes to the block plan, I think that anybody that studies at Colorado College is in such a unique place, and everybody knows that coming in. The block plan is something that's special, regardless of what you end up doing after college. But I found that first of all, entering into the workforce, but then making a quick change into tech after a very, very short career in television, I was able to leverage so many of the skills that we learn on the block plan to position myself well, even though I didn't have hard experience going into the tech world. So things like being able to learn and pick up on content incredibly quickly, being able to execute on things without hesitation, being able to pivot really quickly. If you're working on one thing and demands or priorities change, those of us who are used to that kind of timeline don't freak out when we're asked to make a change with a day's notice, or we're asked to turn around something overnight, where those who studied on the semester plan may feel like that isn't enough time for them to do great work. So those are the skills that I learned in the block plan that I was really able to highlight when I was interviewing, to show that even though I haven't worked in tech before, I have experience working in a fast-paced and dynamic environment, and I know that I can leverage that skill set into whatever content you need me to.
You shared a number of the skills that you were able to really share with employers that were very transferable across industry as well. So oftentimes I hear students are a little intimidated having a humanities major and thinking about a job perhaps in tech. Could you share a little bit about what you learned on the job and what you brought to the technology field versus what you were able to really learn while you were working?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's something that isn't discussed enough. And granted, I can only speak for the two tech companies that I've worked at, but something that isn't maybe necessarily clear to students coming out of school is that companies are set up to teach you the hard skills when you get there. I didn't know anything about the particular products at Google and now at Amazon that I'm working to consult clients on. I wasn't familiar with those particular platforms. I learned all of those hard skills in boot camp style trainings that take place in the first few weeks as an employee. That was something that I didn't know and spent a lot of time agonizing over, thinking, oh, I'm not cut out for this job. So that's something that I would certainly, shout from the rooftops to everyone, that you don't need to develop all of the hard skills coming in. And that being said, a lot of companies are looking for people like Colorado College graduates who have soft skills, that have a dynamic learning style, and are able to jump into a 2-week style boot camp and walk out the other side feeling ready to jump into the job. So I think that's the most important thing to know. The other thing that I wanted to mention is I didn't have a legitimate job until almost a year after I graduated from college. At the time, it certainly did bring me a little bit of anxiety, and I certainly felt that societal and family pressure to jump into something a little bit more legitimate. But I read a really impactful book the summer before my senior year of college called The Defining Decade by Meg Jay. And it's a book that I recommend to anybody that is a recent or a soon-to-be or a recent graduate, especially in their 20s. The premise of the book is saying that there's maybe a conception in society that your 20s, the decade of between 20 and 30, is a time for you to figure out what you're doing. And that shouldn't be wasted. Like, while it's a time for you to explore, it's also the most critical time for you to develop your skills and your passions that will leverage you into a long and hopefully fruitful career in the future. So I spent that time, and also would recommend everybody spend that time exploring things that you're interested in, but also can give you opportunities to develop anecdotes and experiences that you can share with future employers to demonstrate those skills. So for example, when I interviewed at Google, the only things that I could speak to in terms of my leadership experience was working as a lifeguard, which again, isn't the type of career that you would typically speak about in an interview for one of the largest tech companies in the world. I also used sales experience from a retail job working at Banana Republic to share my experience about, my experience in sales. I talked about working at the Catalyst and turning around quick deadlines. So things like that maybe aren't conventional, but showed that I didn't waste the time that I had between, graduation and my first corporate job. I really took advantage of that time to develop skills, even if they were small experiences, to demonstrate my leadership, to demonstrate my experience in sales, and ultimately be able to show that no matter what the content is that I was going to be working on, I was a go-getter. I was someone that took advantage of the opportunities before me, and I could articulate them back.
Wonderful. You mentioned also, Maggie, that you spoke to an alum at Google before applying there. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of relationship and building connections?
Oh my gosh.
To your own career journey. Yeah.
Oh, it is absolutely invaluable. I think most people know that at this point. And in the world where we have access to people through LinkedIn, through TigerLink, through Facebook and Instagram, whatever it is, I have, from the very beginning of my career exploration, which started probably my sophomore or junior year of college, have never felt hesitation or reservations about reaching out to people in my network. That's CC network, that's a network that I have through family, through friends, through other channels. And I do think that there's an aspect, I certainly feel this way, I can speak for myself, that those of us who have found some stability in our career really, really want to help others do the same. I know how hard it can be, I know how scary it can be, and it's something that brings me a lot of joy to be able to help share some insights and some experiences with those who are early in their career. When it comes to networking, I think that I recommend that there be a clear ask and a clear agenda, I guess, when it comes to spending the time to meet with someone, just so that you have, a clear vision of what you're hoping to get out of that relationship, and that the person that you're meeting with also has an idea of how they can help you. So in the case of my original connection at Google that ultimately led me my job, this was someone who was a peer who I felt really comfortable just saying, hey, how did you study feminist and gender studies like me and get a job at this major company? But I've also made an effort to reach out to people who are way senior than me, or who are connected through CC but graduated like 20 years before me. I typically like to lead with the connection, have a very clear ask, and also ask for a pretty low investment in terms of time. So that's like a 15-minute phone call, or I'll come to you and buy you a coffee, as a way to, when you're the asker, when you are the person who is developing the network relationship, you want to make sure that you are respectful of the people who are giving their time and their resources.
That's great advice. I know that sometimes students are intimidated to reach out to others. And so it's great to hear that you, like many alums, are more than willing to have those conversations, but it is important to prepare for them so they can demonstrate that they know what they're hoping to gain from that conversation.
Right. I do want to say too, though, again, in my experience in tech, it's pretty undeniable that a referral or a connection is really important. From my understanding, they're assessed, through sort of a different channel. We have a process here at Amazon as well as at Google in which current employees can refer candidates that they think would be great for the company or for a specific role. So if you have connections in any area that you're interested in, of course, make sure that you demonstrate your fit for the role and for the company, and not necessarily assume that just because you went to the same school as someone, they're willing to vouch for you. But I do often recommend that people utilize those channels, knowing that, particularly in this industry, the referrals carry a lot of weight. So see who you know, and see what people are willing to offer, but do know that network and connections go a very long way.
And that sometimes, you may not directly know an alum, but that you find them on LinkedIn, and that making that ask and making that connection around that common experience of Colorado College can also yield wonderful conversations.
Of course.
Yeah. So as we bring our conversation to a close, Maggie, is there any final thoughts or advice you have for students in general?
As I was thinking about maybe what I would have done differently or earlier in my career, I found so much value in recent years in really exploring, discovering, and being able to articulate my personal strengths. And I think that I could have used the Career Center as a way to help facilitate that when I was still in school. The companies that I've worked for have also had really wonderful personal development programs in which I've been able to lean into some of the resources like Gallup Strengths Finder, Insights Discovery, even Myers-Briggs, and things like that, simply to be able to pick out a couple of really clear, not anecdotes, but clear strengths and values that you can articulate and that you can lean on when it comes to interviewing. So I think I spent a lot of time early on thinking, well, what is the career for me? Like, what is the job title or the company or the role that I think I want? And I certainly think there's value in looking at the landscape around you and assessing like what all of your options are. But I think that if I could go back, if I could understand what my unique values and skills were from the very beginning, I would have had an easier time navigating a move, an earlier move, or maybe more clear move into what I wanted to be doing. But that being said, the time that I spent not doing what I'm doing, not having a career in tech, also led me to a really rich experience that I could speak to in interviews, and that ultimately led me to where I am. But I do think that knowing your strengths and understanding what value you bring to a company, that's based on your education, that's also just based on your personality and how you were brought up, can really help alleviate some of the worry and the stress and anxiety of where's my career going to go, because you understand what it is that you bring to the table. I also had a lot of no's. I want to be clear that in my exploration to, sort of the winding path that's brought me here, I have also been rejected from tons and tons of different roles and companies around, in tech and not in tech. You only need one job. You only want to work somewhere where your unique skills and values are needed and valued. I think that it can be really hard to hear a no. I have shed many tears, over hard, things that I really set my heart on, and that ultimately didn't work out. But in the end, with a little bit of space, I can see that ultimately you find yourself in a role and in a career and in a company that fits your unique skill set and where you're going to be valued, and that's where you want to work. So don't get too down on both, specific company rejections, but also the state of things right now. It can be, there's silver lining to everything. I know that's a little bit of a cliche, but I think if you use this time while you're still in school or while you're a recent grad to get experiences that you can speak to with regards to leadership, with regards to, transferable skills, and also really understand what it is that you're good at, what it is that brings you passion and joy, and where you think that those skills could fit. That's all you can do. And eventually you'll find yourself in a job, and it's a very, very long career. So yeah, I think it all shakes out, and know that the experience that you have at Colorado College is something that is invaluable no matter where you end up in your career.
Thank you so much, Maggie, for sharing all those words of wisdom and advice from your own experience. To hear from other individuals and other alumni, feel free to visit our website at www.coloradocollege.edu/career center, where you can find advice from alums like Maggie Deadrick and other alumni to help you in your job search and with other helpful resources. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Australia. We appreciate your time.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for having me.